I've got a little bit of a voice thing today going on, so if I keep my distance a bit or if I sound a bit more like Johnny Cash than normal, just go along with it. Hey, if you have a Bible, would you open it to Mark chapter 3? If you're using one of the study Bibles that we give out, and if you don't have one, I encourage you, grab one. We've got them over here. It's page 1562, Mark chapter 3. I took some guff a couple of weeks ago about my building update that really wasn't an update. As a matter of fact, it was called a non-update update. It'll be clear soon why I haven't been able to be more clear about what that is. Suffice to say is it is becoming more solid, and we are moving forward at a pretty good pace right now with that, and that will make sense here very, very shortly. I'm just asking for your patience because I cannot make an announcement before the right time, okay? But that is coming. But I do want to say this. In this time of not so patient waiting, we need to get down who we are as a church. This needs to sink down into our bones about who we're going to be, and to refine this, because what we don't want to do is be trying to figure out who we are as we're going in and meeting all these new people and trying to figure out what we're going to be doing. And I want to say this with clarity and conviction, and make sure that we're on the same page. And I'm going to keep beating this nail. I'm just going to keep hitting it. A building is a tool, not a home. And that is it. A building for a church is a place for us to come together and worship, but it is a tool, it is not a home. The work of the church is always out there. Always out there. If you look at the first 300 years of the church, there were no buildings. But, and as a matter of fact, since it was illegal to be a Christian in those times, they actually had to post guards. The deacons ran guard duty, I'm not making this up, to make sure that folks they didn't know just didn't show up, because you didn't know who was a spy and you didn't know who was going to get you arrested. And yet that was the greatest growth that the church had ever experienced, because they got that the work of the church happens out there. It doesn't happen in here. This is where we worship and love one another and encourage one another. And then we go get to work. That's the way that we've got to get that in, because I'll be honest, as a pastor, so much of my work is centered around what happens here rather than what happens out there. And I am trying desperately to break those habits in my life, to make sure that we're getting that out there, because Thrive Church is planted with this idea that disciples make disciples and churches plant churches. Disciples make disciples, churches plant churches. Multiplication is the heart of what we're going to do. So today, as we get into Mark chapter 3, I want to look at this text from a disciple-making standpoint. A lot of times when we come to a text, we zone in, on little details. Today I want to take a little larger view of what happens here in Mark chapter 3. Before we do that, I want to make sure that I've convinced myself and you of this. What is the first directive that Jesus gives? Or not directive, but when he calls the disciples, he said, follow me and I'll do what? I'm going to make you into fishers of men. He speaks in a context that what he's saying is this: I'll make you a disciple maker. And what is the very last thing, that very first church conference that he says before he goes to heaven? What does he say there? Go into all the world and make disciples. So kind of this first thing that when he gives them the job description, hey, come follow me, we're going to make disciples. After he spends this time with them and he's going to heaven, he says, okay, get to work. Acts 1:8, hey, we're gonna start here, we're going to go down the road, we're going to go to the end of the world. A little later, they hadn't gone, so persecution comes in to force. I had a professor that would say when Acts 1:8 doesn't happen, Acts 8:1 has to. He forces them out. No, we're going to go make disciples. So I'm saying this to make sure that we are on the same page, that the work of the church is to make disciples. It's what we do. And anything short of that is we're out of line. So I was in I've just got to say how radical sometimes this line of thought is. I was in a meeting the other day with a guy he's been a pastor for about 35 years, and he said, I realized that I've spent so much of my ministry getting people fit to die when I should have been training them to be fit to live. I should have been working on them, for this is what we do. It's not something we just receive. It's something we share. It's something we go and we give to our neighbors. Mark chapter 3. I'm going to start in verse 7. Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a large crowd from Galilee, and a large crowd followed from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and around Tyre and Sidon. The large crowd came to him because they heard about everything he was doing. He told the disciples to have a small boat ready for him so that the crowd wouldn't crush him. Since he had healed many, all who had diseases were pressing toward him to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and they cried out, "You're the Son of God." And he would strongly warn them not to make him known. And I know when we read this text, you go, how in the world is that about disciple making? Stick with me. This is a snapshot. Mark gives us a snapshot of Jesus' ministry, is what he's done here. This is kind of just a hone-in of a whole lot of what he's doing. Jesus' ministry, we'll call it his kingdom agenda. So this is a picture of his kingdom agenda. And if you pay close attention here, you're going to find out that this kingdom agenda that Jesus has, that you and I have, engages the spiritual. It engages this spiritual realm. We see here that demons, they're crying out, "You're the Son of God." Hold on. That's not a confession. Those were fighting words. I know who you are. He's engaging a different level here. And the way that he does that comes primarily through two ways. First, we find him meeting physical needs. We find Jesus just helping folks. He's healing people. Honestly, this is why the crowds are coming for the most part. Because in a place where there's very primitive and scarce medical attention, all of a sudden now here's someone who can heal leprosy. I mean, that's crazy. And if you've got a family member that's struggling, I mean, what would you do? You do everything in the world you could just to get near this Jesus. He's providing in practical but extraordinary ways. The second way that he engages this is he keeps a laser-like focus on the cross. We find that several times people want to make him king. They want to push him into a position he does not want here. And that's why he says to the demons, you keep your trap shut. We know who you are. Be quiet about that. That's not it's in the right time for that. You're going to have to keep that in. This kingdom agenda, Jesus would say things like, hey, the kingdom is here. The kingdom, it's here. There's something about the arrival of Jesus that changes everything so that we're going to engage this spiritual realm and provide in practical ways and keep this focus on the cross. You see this just as a kind of a snapshot, because what Jesus does here in these next verses just is amazing, and it's these verses that we just read past like it's not the most amazing thing that we've ever heard. Look at verse 13. Jesus went up the mountain. He summoned those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, to be with him, to send them out to preach, to have authority to drive out demons. He appointed the 12. To Simon he gave the name Peter, and to James the son of Zebedee, and to his brother John he gave the name Boanerges, that is, the sons of thunder. Andrew, Philip, and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. Just kind of get this picture. Jesus goes up the mount. It's almost got one of those Mount Sinai kind of feels to it. Jesus is going up. There's something big happening here. And he calls 12 to him. Don't miss that. Remember, Israel had been dispersed and they were waiting for this restoration, the 12 tribes of Israel. And now here the Messiah has shown up and he calls 12 individuals to him. The picture is this: the restoration that they were waiting for is now. The kingdom is here. We've got to be about this kingdom agenda. Jesus, what he's doing is he's creating an end-time community that we call the church, a group of people who are going to carry out his will and to do his work in the world. Do exactly what he does over and over and over. And Mark gives us this list, 12 guys, that Jesus chooses to disciple. He chooses to, hey, keep close. I want you to be with me. Watch what I do. See how I respond. Watch what my priorities are. See what I value. This is the way that you're to do this. And he calls them apostles. If y'all remember, Scott Kenworthy preached a few weeks back, and it was an incredible sermon, but he talked about this idea of God sending at just the right time, God sending help. Apostles it's just a fancy word that means he sent you. These are the sent ones. That's all that means, and he chooses. And this is why this text just strikes me. It's because of who he chooses. He doesn't choose the best of the best. He didn't go to the varsity squad and say, I want you, and I want you, and I want you. Oh, hang on, you're going to have to step aside. No, not you, kid. I'm talking about the one behind you. Yeah. He says, I want you. No. He takes fishermen with big mouths and with attitudes and dudes that like to start fights. I heard a new ministry that was just started called Sons of Thunder. It was a guy's ministry, and like, yeah, it sounds cool, but something in me goes, I wonder if they know that wasn't a compliment. This whole Sons of Thunder thing wasn't a compliment. Here you got a couple of guys that struggle with racism, and what they're doing is they're willing to call down fire and to blow up a town of people because they don't like him. And Jesus is going, really? Is that the way we're going to do this, fellas? Sons of Thunder, that's the way we're going to do this? So just look at who he calls. Matthew. Matthew is the worst of the worst. Picture, I don't know that we can make sure that we get this. Picture World War II goes the other way. And now we have German overlords here in the States. And your next door neighbor goes to work for the Germans to collect money from you, and he's collecting more than what he needs to so he can get fat. And he's taking that and getting rich off of your mom and off of your family members. How do you think about that guy? I'm not going to lie, we're not going to have nice words. And Jesus invites this guy. Hey, follow me. There's something that he's doing that is so different, so otherworldly, that it just takes you back. I'm going to make a bad preacher admission here today, and I hope you don't judge me terribly by this. Furthermore, I hope you don't try to change my mind, because you're not gonna. And it's this, I don't like Christian movies. I just don't. I know, I see several of you go, oh, I can't believe that. I know, I just don't. I find most of them corny. I'd rather watch a good movie and pull out Christian principles. But The Chosen is something I've seen so far that's been altogether different. Because when I watch that, I think, they've got that. I think that's the way that probably happened. I hope that's the way that happened. And what you see when you watch this is these very human guys with a lot of struggles Peter can't stand Matthew. I got to imagine that's probably right. There's competition in between them. And I go, I bet that looks right. Are we okay now that I fessed up that I don't like Christian movies? Are we still friends with that? I hope so. But when we look at this list of 12, make sure we get this. These are just dudes. They're blue-collar guys that are out working a living, trying to earn just like anybody else. And Jesus says, hey, why don't you come and hang out with me? Why don't you come hang out with me? I'm going to show you a different way. I want you to watch what I do. I want you to follow how I follow. And then they even list Judas. And Mark is always very terse in the way that he writes. He doesn't go on and explain a whole lot. Yeah, and even Judas came. He was the one that betrayed him. Make sure we get this. When we look at discipling or being a disciple of Christ, we have to start with this, that being a disciple of Jesus has nothing to do with our resume. It has everything to do with his resume and our willingness to follow him. Everything we do is about who he is and our willingness to step alongside and say, I'm following him. That's what it means to be a disciple. And Jesus calls these men, he trains them to be an extension of his will. In the coming years, they're going to learn how to do what he does. They're going to learn to engage this spiritual reality that is out there to provide in very physical ways and to keep a focus on the cross. Called them apostles. When we speak of apostles with a capital A, we're referring to these fellas and a few others. But make sure we get this, is that we inherit their ministry. The church is an apostolic body. In other words, it is a group that is sent. It is not called to just gather, it's called to go. That's what we're about. And if they are an extension of his will, then we as disciples are an extension of his will. And our task is to make disciples who make disciples. Disciples who make disciples. I've heard pushback on this. I've heard people say, well, that was for them, and that was for then. I want you to just consider with me for a minute the pattern of the New Testament. Let me just read a couple of verses for you on this. 1 Corinthians 11:1. Imitate me, Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. In other words, watch what I'm doing. He's discipling the church. Philippians 3:17. Join in imitating me, brothers and sisters. Pay careful attention to those who live according to the example you have in us. 2 Timothy 2, verse 2. What you've heard from me and in the presence of many witnesses, commit to disciple faithful men who will be able to teach others also. The pattern of the church, our work is to make disciples who make disciples. That's what we're called to do. As a matter of fact, I would say that is the missing ingredient in our discipleship. We've approached Christianity often as something to be consumed rather than something that is consuming. We don't go and just take stuff in. We don't go and just, oh man, I was fed today. The work of the church is to feed. The work of the church is to get out there. As a matter of fact, I heard a Bible scholar recently call it Christianity Americana. That's what we do. We've had it as something that we're supposed to receive. And actually, we focus there, right? Receive Christ, be baptized. Like that's the end of the task. But the reality is that step one. Step two is now you're on the team. Let's get to work. In the people that are closest to us. I'm not talking about, make sure you get this, I'm not talking about going and standing on the corner with a bullhorn. I'm talking about this, the folks that, where we live, where we work, and where we play. The folks in my house. The folks where I work. Now, granted, I work at a church. You hope they're Christians. But hey, a couple of them still out. and the folks that are directly around us. That was a joke, by the way. It's one of those things that, like, I laugh and I'm like, hey, nobody else laughed, so that's all good. I hear folks talking about, well, what's next? What do I do? The answer is so much simpler than expected. Go love someone and teach them how to follow Jesus. And then expect them to do the same. Expect them to go and do the same as well. Pour into someone. Help them to see Jesus is not someone just to receive, but someone who is involved in every aspect of life, in everything that we do. He's the reason we see the world. He's the reason we watch the news in the way that we do. He's the reason we respond to terrible diagnosis in the way that we do. He's the reason that we face family situations in the way that we do. He's the reason why we go and love our neighbors when it's hard. That's the Jesus that we follow. And that's our task. And I get the pushback here. If someone's going, man, I'm not worthy. You don't know my story. I'm kind of a mess. Here's the good news, is it wasn't ever about you. That's why we get this list of these fellas that were all jacked up. It wasn't ever about how good they were. And today it's not about how good you are either. It's not about how good I am. It's about how incredible Jesus is and the way that he can turn lives around. Because I'm going to tell you what, Peter wasn't worth it. We find Peter, 3 years into this thing, he's busting out his K-bar knife and cutting a guy's ear off. And, you step back and you're like, hey, Pete, I think we missed something along the way here. None of us are worthy of the task we've been given. But that's why he calls it grace. And he allows folks like me, and forgive me, I know a lot of you too, and you, to be a part of this kingdom work that he's doing, to engage this spiritual battle that's happening out there. And you go, man, I've got struggles. Check it out, we all do. First and foremost, if you do, cut it out. Get to work on it. Put up barriers. Put a protection around you. Cut that stuff out. Let's not just make that excuse. When you fall down, get back up. Man, we all mess up. Get up and get back in the game. Get back to work. And they go, well, maybe if I learn this, and it's kind of like, when's the best time to have kids? Well, honestly, when you're about 60. I didn't do well in biology, but I know there's a struggle there, right? So the reality is you can't wait until everything's right. When it comes to being a disciple that makes disciples, you don't wait until everything's right. You go and love folks, and you show them that there's a better way in Jesus, and that he can use your life and your mess and your story to lead others to know him as well, and to change their eternity as well. Hear me on this. Be more impressed with the magnitude of Jesus than you are with the depth of your own sin. See him fresh today. He's awesome at levels that we can scarcely even imagine. And he calls the likes of you and I, and you go, I mess it up. You know what? His power is made perfect in your weakness. When we get up to the line and say, I don't know that I'm ready for this, but I'm going to give it a shot, he shines, because that's what he does. And you go, all right, okay, so if that is it, what do I do? Honestly, we like to check boxes. We like to say, okay, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. Notice what Jesus does. He just calls people to be with him. Hey, be near me. Come and be in my life. Hang out with me. See the way that we face these things. See the way that we approach life. Let people in your world. Let people come close. Spend time with them. There's this false illusion of quality time. Quality time cannot happen without quantity of time. You have to spend time with people. And discipleship simply cannot happen at a distance. It just can't. Let them be close. Let let them see it in you rather than just hear what you have to say. Remember Jesus' ministry. He gave it away to folks who weren't nearly ready for it. This kingdom agenda. And honestly, that's kind of the same pattern. Think about it. We're engaging the spiritual here. And honestly, when we talk about that, that gets very difficult because of the extremes that whenever we talk about spiritual warfare, turns out the church likes to swing pendulums from one side to the next. In one, we're looking for a demon under every rock. And then in the other side, we're acting like that's not really real. It's just something Jesus talked about. The Bible doesn't lie when it says that our fight isn't against flesh and blood, but it is against powers and principalities. I know this, and I know that there are ministers in this room right now that can testify to this. If I'm going to preach a giving series, there's going to be something financial that happens in my world. My AC is going to go out. Just happens. If I'm going to preach a family series, I kid you not, one of my kids is going to go off rails. Just as a healthy reminder. Now, I could say that's coincidence, or I could realize that there's something more to this. That this battle that we face is different. And this is very important for you to hear today and for me to be reminded of today, because there is an enemy that wants your marriage to fail. There is an enemy that wants you to be so busy that you cannot spend time in God's Word. There is an enemy that wants to remind you of your failures. And he wants to remind you of shame. And he wants to remind you that you don't belong. And I'm here to say all of that is a load. All of that is. That's why we keep that in mind as we face the difficulties. As we disciple people, they need to know, hey, this is a spiritual battle. And how do we go about then engaging the world? Just like Jesus did, by meeting physical needs. I knew a missionary in India used to say, if you want to present the gospel to a hungry man, you wrap it in a sandwich. That's real. Help people in tangible ways. And if in a discipleship fashion, that may be grabbing someone younger and saying, hey, we have to help with some funeral meals. Why don't you come alongside? Maybe it's to go and visit someone in the hospital. Why don't you come alongside? Come with me on this. Let's watch this. Take care of folks. That's one of the reasons why I've been pushing, and we've been pushing in our small group structure. Get out and do something. Don't just sit back and learn more. Oh, I know what happened to the Jebusites. Great. Great. You and 3 other people on the planet are interested in that. Go feed someone. Go help change a tire. Go help your neighbor. Get to work. Because when folks see that you love, and as you're teaching someone to come alongside and to help take care of, people are more concerned about what you have to say once they see that you love. Can you imagine being a Christian right now in Syria? There's like 27,000 dead. Digging, trying to help, trying to provide meals. It's easy to see it on that big level, but it needs to come out in day-to-day operations for you and I. It needs to come out in a way that we're helping people. But also, just like Jesus, we have to keep an eye always on the cross. We never move on from the cross. I've had people say, hey man, I want to get into some kind of deep study. I'm like, cool, check out the cross. Well, hey, what's next? It doesn't get any deeper. That's the deep end of the swimming pool. God became a man and came and lived a life that you and I would refuse to live. Died a death we deserved. That's where we keep an eye on. All the time. That's why Jesus, when you see him, I love it. It says he set his face like a flint towards Jerusalem. Hey, we know who you are. Oh, let's make you a king. We got to put that to the side. I'm heading here. He always kept a focus on there. And even as we're discipling folks, we have to be reminded over and over about the cross, because a cross-centered life is a humble and confident and free life. It is humble because we come face to face with our sin and we are forced to realize that we don't deserve this ministry we've been given. But God uses us anyways. And he does this stuff anyways. It's confident because I'm going to tell you something. There is no place where you should feel love more than at the cross, because you realize that God loved you so very, very much that he sent his one and only Son. That anyone that would believe in him wouldn't perish but would have everlasting life. God didn't send his Son into the world to judge the world or condemn the world, but that we could have life through him. That is huge. And it's freeing. Because at the cross, we're reminded that not only are we not captive to sin anymore, but we're not marked by those choices we've made in the past. The shame, the sin, that's not who defines us. Jesus defines us. So when we talk about discipling others, it's about letting someone into your world. Spend time with them. Spend time with them. Let them realize, help them to see that there is a spiritual battle going on out there. We engage the world by meeting physical needs, by helping people. And we always keep an eye on the cross, because that's where it all comes to make sense, and that's where hope is found. Luke 6, and you go, okay, I don't even know how to start. Luke 6 adds a little bit onto this account. It says that ahead of time, Jesus went up to that mountain and he prayed all night. If you're wondering about what you should do if you're considering, hey, how do I disciple someone? Start by praying. Start by praying. God, show me. And when it goes bad, I think that's why Judas is mentioned here. When it goes bad, Judas had the best discipler in the world. Think about it. There's nobody any better at making disciples than Jesus. And Judas still did what Judas did. So you know what we do when we start a process and it fails? You get up and do it again. We get up and do it again. Most Saturday mornings I have breakfast with a few guys that I've known for a very long time, and it strikes me, I was sitting there yesterday with a couple of them, and that both of them in different ways and at different times have discipled me. Both of them. One, a long time ago, I was fresh out of the Navy. I'd got a job in the car business. And here's this guy. We just hired him he'd left Bible college early, and he needed to go back and earn some funds. He comes up to me and just says, hey, I started this book, and it was really, how about you and I have lunch once a week? Let's just start talking. And let me into his world there. And through that began my journey back to Christ. Because I can tell you this, I was living a long way away from Jesus. And through that, and then once I started this road back to Christ, and then I started to feel even this call to ministry, and I went to another buddy, and he was like, hey, why don't you spend, and no, it's not what most folks want to do on their day off, but once a week I go and make hospital calls, physical needs. He's, why don't you spend your day with that? So I started making calls, hospitals, and just sitting and praying with folks, doing that side of it. And here I am having breakfast with these two fellows, and I'm thinking back over the past 3 decades kind of thing and going, part of the ministry that God is using us, gosh, traces its way back through people who just had the guts to say, why don't you come hang out with me for a while? You want to know how the kingdom expands. You want to know how to bring good news to a lost and broken world. Go love your neighbor and invite them into your home. Invite people close. Hey, how about you and I spend some time together? I'd like to show you about this Jesus. I'd like to show you. I'd like to tell you. And to see how there really is a spiritual battle out there. We meet it in physical ways, and we always keep an eye on the cross over and over and over. Yeah. And we keep doing that, and that's how the kingdom grows. Thrive Church, this is who we are. It's what we're going to be about. And I'm going to keep pounding that because I'm convinced that's the way of Jesus. It's not something to be consumed. It's something to be consumed by. Father, we are yours happily. We recognize that so much of this ministry we don't deserve, and yet you use broken people to do extraordinary things. Would you help us to keep our confidence in you, to keep our eye on you, and to engage a world that needs you so very, very desperately? All because your son's awesome, and because your commitment to your church is incredible. In his name we pray. Amen.